Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing again today. On the 26th of April 2023, you issued a press release about the Sky News program Outsiders for breaches of industry codes. On 20th of March 2023, in relation to the ABC, in response to Senator Henderson, you agreed that the ABC breached the codes during their coverage of a community meeting in Alice Springs. You endorsed the Ombudsman's finding, the ABC Ombudsman's finding, that there were breaches of the code, yet published no press release about that from what we can see. Why does a Conservative news service cop a full press release when you conclude they breached the code, but when the ABC breaches the code, there's barely a peep from you publicly?
Senator, I might need to refer to my colleagues for the details of that particular circumstance.
Sure.
But I would have to say that we put out media releases for pretty much every breach that we look at under the Broadcasting Services Code Act, whether it be a national or a commercial broadcaster. So, and there would, I can take on notice, but there are certainly circumstances in the last year where we certainly have put out media releases on the ABC. So it's not our practice to discriminate between types of broadcasters. We like to make transparent our decisions about breaches across the board. I might just see whether or not my colleagues have anything to add.
Thank you. Karina Chapman, Deputy Chair. In the instance of the ABC Alice Springs issue, we didn't undertake a full formal investigation. We fully considered the matter. We looked at the content and we considered the report by the Ombudsman at the time. So we didn't find a formal breach in that instance. That was on the basis that the ABC themselves had found a breach. The ABC themselves conceded that there were issues with the broadcast and also that there was considerable media attention at the time which highlighted the findings that the ABC made. So we didn't put out a press release because we didn't actually find a formal, we didn't make a formal finding.
Right, thank you. And
if I could just add to that, sorry, I just found something in my notes. For example, the investigation we did on the ABC's Four Corners program called The Big Lie, we did a media release for that on the 21st of December 2022 because we had found breach findings in that program. Okay,
thank you. And I accept your answer from before. Were there any, referring to your letter, Ms. O'Loughlin, with to Senator Henderson on, it's your file reference BM 11801 on the 20th of March, you mentioned in the second last paragraph the ABC conducted by the ABC about the circumstances attaching to this matter, including any changes to its editorial processes. Did the ABC advise of any changes to its editorial processes?
I don't have the letter in front of me.
We did seek a response from the ABC, but I think we'll need to take on notice whether we received a response.
I'll read the second last paragraph. However, the ACMA has requested that the ABC keep it informed about the outcome of any further internal investigation conducted by the ABC about the circumstances attaching to this matter, brackets, including any changes to its editorial processes and any additional steps that may be taken by the ABC as a result.
Senator, we will take that on notice for you. I don't have that in my pack.
Thank you. What does it do to the trust of a media company when it has obvious bias?
Senator, I don't think that's on something on which I can express an opinion, but I do think in our experiences broadcasters take very seriously their obligations under the various regulatory codes that they're subjected to, which do come to, in most cases, provisions around bias, impartiality, factual accuracy.
Okay. It would erode trust if it's done often.
That would probably be a matter for the broadcasters to comment on, Senator.
Thank you. I'll just ask some questions here briefly. If they've been covered, then just tell me so. I've checked with Senator Cadell. He hasn't covered this one. Could you briefly explain the obligation for carriers to allow network switching for 000 calls and why this didn't happen during the Optus outage? The second part, you've already discussed that at length, so I'm not interested in that. But the obligation, could you please explain the obligation, please?
Certainly, Senator. It's the obligation is usually referred to in our lingo as the mobile camp-on provisions, and that's a globally standardised arrangement which requires that carriers where emergency call services can't be delivered by a particular carrier for a particular reason, that those networks allow those calls to camp onto their network for them to be delivered to the emergency call service. So that's
free automatic switching.
So it's an automatic transfer of those particular calls going to emergency call service to camp on to another network. If I have that incorrect, my colleague will let me know.
She's got it. Okay, thank you. Are there any fines applicable for carriers failing to allow switching or failing to make switching work for 000 calls?
Senator, I think that's part of what we will be looking at in our investigation as to what was the reason, if in fact that was the reason why some emergency calls didn't get through, and as I mentioned earlier, it's still not very clear and we're still in information gathering mode about why that didn't work. So I just ask Mr Fenton to go over some of the potential regulatory responses we may have if we do in fact find any breaches, but early days.
Thank you.
So just to clarify again that these enforcement options available to the ACMA, if it does find breaches of the determination in question, the emergency call determination, the ACMA can issue a formal warning, it can issue a remedial direction to take action to comply. It can accept a court enforceable undertaking. There are infringement penalties available, currently set at $18,780 per contravention, and it is open to the ACMA to apply to the federal court for penalties as well.
So just an interesting quirk, that per contravention doesn't mean each phone call, or it does?
It would depend on the construct of the particular obligation in question. But it can apply to a specific contravention. But once again, it comes back to the actual
and the circumstances. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Finally, it strikes me that there's the Starlink service, which covers almost everywhere in Australia that can see the sky, and that's pretty much everywhere. Would it be a good backup to for text messages, for limited voice conversations, for emergency calls to fit into that network?
Senator, that's a really interesting question, and I think there's a lot of interest in Starlink and indeed other satellite services, low Earth orbit satellite services that may be able to provide direct-to-handset text or indeed calls, which are now starting to emerge, and the potential for that to really benefit particularly people in regional and remote areas or areas of Australia that have trouble getting signals. I think the department are commencing a look at that in more depth to see what that potential is. There has been quite a lot of strong interest internationally as well, as you can imagine, from particularly countries who have the same sort of issues we have in trying to get signals into various areas. The United States recently, from my reading, had come to the conclusion that technology was just not quite mature enough at the moment to be a backstop for emergency calls, but could be in the future. So I think that's something that the department is going to be looking at, about whether that's a potential in the future, and we think that's a really exciting development in the satellite space.
Thank you. I must say, Chair, I appreciate the direct answers.
No problem, Senator Roberts.